one group of scientists think advances in computer technology may help them to prove it exists and react to major events worldwide. And this computer and the small box attached, codenamed the Egg, might hold the answer.
It was a program that started in about 1979 in the engineering school at Princeton, run by Robert John and managed by Brenda Dunn. I came in 1980 and spent 22 years there before I retired, doing things that sound a little strange to people, but which are actually quite important when we're thinking about consciousness. What happens at the edges of what we know about with consciousness? Is there any real presence of consciousness in the physical world? So we set up experiments to ask that question and got an answer, which was yes. Not a big surprise to people who are, got an answer, which was yes. Not a big surprise to people who are interested in spiritual matters, but a terribly difficult thing for most mainstream scientists to accept or themselves take any time really to examine. In 1997, I started doing something which turned into what we now call the Global Consciousness Project, which is looking at the entire world in a way. We're using our same kind of technology we developed in the lab, but now to look at a kind of non-local consciousness that appears to be a real presence in the world.
For 5 years, Roger Nelson has been running the Global Consciousness Project. He collects data from what are called random event generators. 75 standalone computers have been set up around the world. They produce continuous random combinations of numbers that are sent back to Princeton. Nelson monitors the machines, looking for any unusual deviations in the data.
REG machines, random event generators, are electronic tosses of the coin.
One type of random number generator experiment that's been conducted many, many times, hundreds of times, over the past 4 decades or so, since around the 1960s, has been a random generator that only produces sequences of random bits, zeros and ones, like flipping coins. And you would simply ask somebody to press a button. It would produce 200 bits. And you would ask them to say, well, try to make it produce more 1 bits than 0 bits. And when you take the entire body of literature, all of the hundreds of experiments that have been done, you can ask a single question. Did it matter that people were trying to push it towards ones or push it towards zeros? And the overall answer is yes, it does matter. That somehow intention is correlated with the operation, with the output of these random number generators, such that if you wish for more ones, somehow the generators produce more one.
A true coin has a 50-50 probability of being heads or tails, and you can't predict it if it's thrown properly. So electronic random number generators do that properly. They flip coins, so to speak, high speed, produce a lot of ones and zeros or a lot of heads and tails, and you cannot predict the sequence at all.
Nelson's machines are as close to pure chance as it's possible to get, so a regular pattern should be very unusual. So when they do show up, the team is convinced that something very extraordinary is happening. Dean Radin from the Institute of Noetic Science worked with the project. He also believes that global consciousness must exist. He set up the network of eggs around the globe and thinks they hold the key to unlocking this mystery.
They called it originally the EGG, for electrogaiagram, which is an analogy to electroencephalogram, the EEG. In other words, we want a bunch of sensors around the brain of the planet to see if we can find patterns, in exactly the same way that we look at patterns that go on in the brain.
The aim is to see if human responses to world events can influence their output. Anyone who works closely with machines knows how temperamental they can be. But how can remote computers without operators interact with human minds? Nelson
These are basically working off of quantum entanglement.
admits he doesn't know how it happens, but he's certain it takes place.
Today, there are over 60 random event generators placed around the world. The numbers that come into the generators during normal random events for global consciousness are just that, random. Several hours in advance of a major world event, non-random, coherent numbers are present. A large spike in the data waveform appears, giving a precognition that a major event is about to occur.
If something like Princess Diana's funeral was bringing 2 billion people to think about the same thing and maybe feel sadness or compassion together, that we should try to see whether our machines, our random event generators, could detect that, could react to it. So in that particular case, I asked all of my colleagues and friends who did the same kind of research, please take data. We had several lines of data in Europe, several lines of data in this country, put them all together, and remarkably enough, or maybe not so surprising if you believe the data from the laboratory experiments, we have a big, strong effect. If you did the same thing 100 times, you wouldn't see the size of change in our REG devices that we saw during the time of the funeral for Princess Diana.
The September 6, 1997 funeral of Princess Diana yielded a major signal in the data. Global compassion following tragedy of major world figures or world loss of life yielded the strongest spikes in the data.
New York, September the 11th, 2001. The tragedy unfolding will change the world forever. 50 kilometers away at Princeton University, the gauges of Dr. Roger Nelson's EGG machine are going berserk.
Before the actual crash occurred, before about 9 o'clock, I knew nothing. I was happy-go-lucky. I was writing letters how the world was peaceful, right? Well, the world was not peaceful, and already the data, before I knew anything about it, the data were changing.
On the morning of September the 11th, 2001, as the American Airlines flight left Logan International Airport, the computers appeared to do something extraordinary.
4 days before September 11th, where the eggs are just doing what they normally do, nothing. They're wandering randomly. And then all of a sudden, on September 11th, there's a trend that takes off, which is extremely unusual.
The random event generators began to synchronize, overriding the laws of chance. Could this have been connected to the attacks?
We have now 5 years of data, and on 2 or 3 of the measures, this 9/11 outcome is unique. There's nothing else like it in the database.
News of the catastrophe flashed round the world.
The reason why I'm showing you this information is because I believe that we have been affected by alien life, and that electronics are part of that. And here, extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields cause DNA strand breaks in normal cells. Extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields aren't considered as a real carcinogenic agent, despite the fact that some studies have showed impairment of the DNA integrity in different cell lines. So that's the thing, is that if there's a wireless technology that was that's fallen from the heavens onto Earth and emits a signal, well, could be subliminal messaging, and and we're trying to find a missing link, right? DNA change allowed ancient humans to escape Africa. Humans could migrate because they were no longer dependent on fish. A new study I would suggest that humans were able to spread out and take over the world because of new DNA change or mutation that popped up in their DNA 85,000 or so years ago. DNA change didn't make humans suddenly crave new adventures. Instead, let them get away from with just eating plants for good brain development. This was enough to unleash humans onto the world, and that's been the same since this tiny mistake first appeared in our 3 billion letters of DNA. Support the idea that the fact that Africans have a certain DNA difference that Asians and Europeans do not. Different strength in the enzyme that convert. A lot of scientists estimate that mutation first appeared around 85,000 years ago, which fits the story nicely. Unfortunately, these analyses are not very precise, and there are a wide range of possible dates centered around 85,000 years ago. The actual number from the paper, 85,000 plus or minus 84,000 years ago. Okay, so doesn't come without a cost. Thinking through this form is no longer than common in Asians and Europeans. The idea that once humans could hunt for land animals, they no longer needed to rely on plants since the mutation was lost. So, I think there's some possibilities. Well, I'm having a hard time finding any research on it, so this is going to be a topic that I will delve into a little bit more. But and the thing is, with the electronics, and they can survive the harsh environment of space and whatnot. So, that's the thing is, we don't understand the power of computers and whatnot, of technology. And we could be creating, being programmed to create like the alien life that created the technology in the first place. And so instead of actually traveling light years and stuff, they sent technology out and landed, took over a planet, and booyah. Here we are. And we're going to be creating, because we can do gene editing. We're building AI, artificial intelligence. We could be building our overlords, quite literally. And I don't think that the AI, what's scary about the AI is that they could be working for us, but really they could be creating some other crazy technology and such that's actually aliens. Whatever. Take care, be safe, be kind, stay strong, and think about it.